Welcome to Paul's Learning Academy, where we do the research so you don't have to. Here's a deep dive into World War I, why it happened, what changed, and how it ended. Like, subscribe and comment on what you want to learn about next. Imagine living in a world where a single gunshot could pull dozens of countries into war. In 1914, that's exactly what happened. Over 16 million people would die. Empires would collapse, and the map of the world would change forever. So how did it actually happen? Before the war, Europe looked stable on the surface, but underneath, it was full of tension, like pressure building inside a volcano. There were major forces driving that tension. First, militarism. Countries believed that having a powerful military was the key to survival and dominance. Germany, for example, built one of the strongest armies in the world. Meanwhile, Britain focused on its navy, launching massive battleships called dreadnoughts. Each country feared falling behind, so they kept building more weapons, preparing for a war no one officially wanted. Second, alliances. Europe was divided into two major camps: the Allied powers, Britain, France, and Russia, the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and later the Ottoman Empire. These alliances were meant to keep peace, but in reality, they made war much more dangerous, because if one country fought, everyone would be dragged in. Third, imperialism. European nations competed for colonies in Africa, Asia, and beyond. These colonies meant power, resources, and prestige, but they also created rivalry, especially between Germany, Britain, and France. And finally, nationalism. People had strong pride in their countries, but also their ethnic identities. This was especially dangerous in the Balkans, a region in southeastern Europe. Different ethnic groups wanted independence from empires like Austria-Hungary. One country in particular, Serbia, wanted to unite Slavic people. And that brings us to the moment everything exploded: the assassination. In June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, visited Sarajevo. Sarajevo was in Bosnia, a region full of nationalist tension. A group of young Serbian nationalists planned to assassinate him. At first, their attempt failed. But then, by pure chance, the Archduke's car took a wrong turn, and one of the conspirators, Gavrilo Princip, was standing right there. He fired 2 shots. The Archduke and his wife were killed. That moment didn't just end lives, it triggered a chain reaction that the world couldn't stop. The beginning of the war. After the assassination, Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia. With support from Germany, they declared war. But Serbia had an ally, Russia. Russia mobilized its army to defend Serbia. Germany responded by declaring war on Russia. Then on Russia's ally, France, Germany had a plan called the Schlieffen Plan. They wanted to quickly defeat France before Russia could fully prepare. To do that, Germany invaded Belgium, a neutral country. That one move changed everything, because Britain had promised to protect Belgium, so Britain declared war on Germany within weeks. What started as a regional conflict became a full-scale world war. The war goes on for years. The war quickly turned into a stalemate, especially on the Western Front. Soldiers dug trenches stretching hundreds of miles across France and Belgium. Life in the trenches was miserable: mud, rats, disease, and constant fear. Between the trenches was no man's land, an open area filled with barbed wire and enemy fire. Charging across it was almost suicidal. New technology made the war even more deadly. Machine guns could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. Poison gas burned lungs and blinded soldiers. Tanks were introduced to break through defenses. Despite all this, neither side could gain a decisive advantage. Meanwhile, millions of soldiers and civilians died. The war dragged on for years. The shift in the war. By 1917, everything began to shift. First, Russia collapsed internally during the Russian Revolution and left the war. That should have helped Germany. But then came a major turning point. The United States entered the war on the Allied side. Why? Germany had been attacking ships with submarines, and they sent the Zimmermann telegram, proposing an alliance with Mexico against the US that pushed America into the war. Fresh American troops and massive resources gave the Allies new strength. Germany, already weakened by blockades and shortages, couldn't keep up. By late 1918, German soldiers were exhausted, food was scarce, protests broke out at home. Finally, on November 11, 1918, Germany agreed to an armistice ceasefire. The fighting stopped. The end of the war. The war officially ended in 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty punished Germany harshly. It lost territory. Its military was restricted, and it had to pay massive reparations. The treaty will be covered in great depth in a separate video coming next week. But instead of creating lasting peace, this treaty created anger and instability, and just 20 years later, the world would fall into war again. World War I didn't start because of one event. It started because the world was already on edge. The assassination was just the spark, a trigger, if you must call it that. If you want to understand the next chapter, how this war led directly to World War II, subscribe, because that story is even bigger.